The stagecoach door opened, and 5 years of carefully built solitude shattered in the space of a single breath. Josiah Mercer had expected a stranger. That was the arrangement. A woman seeking opportunity, a man offering land, and between them, the clean simplicity of a contract. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind the way he rehearsed everything, quietly, practically, without sentiment. He would meet her. He would assess whether the arrangement could work. He would bring her to the ranch or put her back on the next stage, and either way, life would continue in its familiar rhythm of silence and labor. What stepped into the Montana dust was nothing he had prepared for. She emerged in pieces. A hand first, small and trembling, gripping the doorframe as though the world beyond it might swallow her whole. Then a boot, worn but serviceable, feeling for the step with the caution of someone who had learned that the ground beneath her could not always be trusted. And then the woman herself, stepping fully into the April sunlight of Benson Creek, and Josiah felt something shift inside his chest that he could not name and did not want to examine. She was smaller than he had imagined, though he realized now he had imagined nothing concrete, just a vague shape to fill the empty spaces of a life he had stopped pretending was enough. She wore a traveling dress of dark blue calico, dusty from the journey, and a bonnet with a veil that obscured her face. But the veil shifted as she descended, caught by a gust of spring wind, and what it revealed stopped his breath entirely. Purple bruising along her jawline, spreading upward toward her left eye, which was swollen nearly shut. A split lip, healing but recent, the skin around it tight and angry. She held herself with a rigidity that spoke of pain managed through pure determination, of dignity maintained by nothing more than willpower, and the refusal to collapse in front of strangers. Their eyes met across 10 feet of rutted street, and Josiah Mercer, who had not been moved by anything in 5 years, felt the earth tilt beneath him. Her eyes were hazel. He noticed this with a clarity that startled him, the way certain details burn themselves into memory during moments that matter. And in those hazel eyes, he saw something that made his chest constrict. Not fear, though there was that too, layered deep. Something worse. A terrible, fragile hope that she was trying desperately to hide. As though hope itself had become dangerous. As though wanting anything at all was a risk she could no longer afford. If you are watching from somewhere in this wide and turning world, tell me in the comments where you are tonight. I want to see how far this story travels. And stay with me, because what happens next between these two people will remind you that second chances are real, even when the world has done its worst. Benson Creek, Montana Territory, April 1882. 23 buildings if you counted the half-collapsed livery at the edge of town, and Josiah had counted them once, years ago, when counting things still seemed to matter. The settlement sat stubborn and weathered along a main street rutted deep with wagon tracks, false-fronted buildings promising more than they delivered, the whole place held together by grim determination and the particular obstinacy of people who had chosen to live where the land itself seemed to argue against human presence. Josiah had arrived in this country 5 years prior, carrying nothing but guilt and a set of tools, and the burning need to be somewhere no one knew his name. He had bought 300 acres of grassland north of town with money saved from years of cowboying, built a cabin with his own hands, started a herd with what remained. The work had saved him, or at least kept him busy enough that the memories could not always find him. He had learned to read the Montana sky the way other men read newspapers. The angle of afternoon light across the grasslands, the quality of silence before a storm, the way dust devils formed and dissolved like hopes he had stopped entertaining. He was good at being alone. He had made it his craft, his religion, his armor. 3 months ago, in a moment of weakness he still could not explain, he had responded to a matrimonial advertisement in the Helena Independent. The notice had been flowery and vague, promising companionship suited to frontier life and ladies of good character seeking honest partnership. He had written a single letter describing his ranch without embellishment. 300 acres, a 2-room cabin, livestock that mostly survived the winters, and a man who had grown more comfortable with silence than conversation. He had not expected a reply. When one came, he had almost burned it unopened. Now the stage was here, and the woman was here, and the bruises on her face were asking questions that his carefully constructed solitude had no answers for. The other men loitering along the boardwalk cast curious glances his direction. Josiah Mercer, the recluse of the northern range, waiting for a mail-order bride like some lovesick fool. He could feel their amusement, their speculation, the particular cruelty of small-town entertainment. His jaw tightened. Let them look. The driver, a weathered man named Sykes who had been running this route for 15 years, climbed down and caught Josiah's eye. Something passed between them that Josiah could not quite read. Warning, pity, both. Mercer, Sykes said, his voice carefully neutral. Got a passenger for you. Sykes pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and pressed it into his hand. This came with her. The agency said to give it to you private. Josiah took the envelope, noted the broken seal. You read it? Hell no. But the agent in Helena wanted me to know what I was transporting. Sykes glanced toward Cora, lowered his voice. Whatever trouble she is running from, it is the kind that follows. You take my meaning. Josiah broke the seal right there in the street. The handwriting was precise, businesslike, belonging to a man named Howard Brennan at the matrimonial agency in Helena. The letter was direct. By the time you read this, you will have observed Miss Ashford's condition. She came to the agency 3 weeks ago seeking immediate placement. She bore the marks you now see and carried only what fit in a single trunk. She revealed she was fleeing a guardian who had, in her words, exceeded the bounds of proper discipline. Our physician examined her and found evidence of previous abuse, injuries older than the ones currently visible. She is not in any condition to fulfill the typical duties of a wife. She requires sanctuary more than ceremony. You are under no obligation to proceed. If you choose to send her back, the agency will refund your deposit and attempt alternative placement, though options are limited. However, if you choose to offer her refuge, even temporarily, you should know the man she fled is a person of influence in Boston. He has made inquiries. We have been careful, but determined men find what they seek. I leave the decision to your conscience and your character. Josiah read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket. When he looked up, Cora was watching him from the bench outside the general store where she had settled herself with the careful movements of someone rationing pain. Even across the distance, even through the veil, he could feel the weight of her gaze. She knew what that letter contained. She was waiting for him to make the decision that would determine whether she spent tonight in a bed or back on a stagecoach, heading toward whatever hell she had escaped. A child, no more than 7, tugged at her mother's sleeve and asked in a carrying whisper why that lady's face was all purple. The mother shushed her and pulled her away, but the damage was done. Cora's shoulders drew tighter, her chin lifting in defiance of humiliation. That single gesture, that refusal to crumble under public scrutiny, told Josiah more about who she was than any letter could. He crossed the street to where she sat. She stood as he approached, her posture defensive despite the pain it clearly cost her. He could see her bracing, preparing for rejection, for judgment, for the next blow in a life that had taught her to expect them. "Miss Ashford." He removed his hat. "I am Josiah Mercer. I read the letter from the agency. I know you are running from something. I know you are hurt worse than you are letting on. And I know this arrangement is not what either of us bargained for." She went very still, her hands white around the handle of her carpet bag. "But here is what I want you to understand." He met her eyes and held them, because what he was about to say mattered more than anything he had said in 5 years. "My ranch is a day's ride north. It is remote. It is rough. It is not much to look at, but it is mine. And on my land, you will be safe. No one will hurt you. No one will touch you. No one will demand anything you are not willing to give." A single tear traced down her bruised cheek. She wiped it away quickly, ashamed of the weakness. Why? The word was barely audible. "You do not know me. You might be trouble," Josiah said quietly. "Probably are. But trouble comes whether we invite it or not. And I would rather face it having done the right thing than spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have helped and chose not to." "I can work," she said, sudden urgency flooding her voice. "I am not asking for charity. I can cook, clean, mend, tend a garden. I am not useless, Mr. Mercer, despite appearances. Did not figure you were." He picked up her carpet bag and nodded toward it his buckboard. "Come on, we have given these folks enough to talk about." He paused. "Let us get you home." Home. The word hung between them, foreign and familiar all at once, belonging to neither of them yet reaching for both. The ride north took them out of Benson Creek and into country that grew wilder with each passing mile. The rutted track wound through grassland dotted with sage and early wildflowers. Mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow despite spring's arrival. Hawks circled overhead, riding thermals with a patience that suggested they had all the time in the world. Cora sat beside him on the wagon seat, silent, her hands folded in her lap. She had removed the veil once they left town, and in the unforgiving sunlight, the full geography of damage was visible. Purple and yellow and sickly green across half her face. When the wagon hit rough ground, she pressed a hand to her ribs and breathed through her nose with the controlled discipline of someone who had long practiced managing pain. "There is a canteen under the seat," he said after an hour of silence. "Water is fresh from this morning." She drank sparingly, replaced it. "Thank you." They stopped once at a creek crossing to water the horses. Cora stood at the edge, staring at her reflection in the clear current. After a long moment, she knelt carefully, cupped water in her hands, and washed her face with movements that were more ritual than hygiene. A cleansing. A line drawn between what was and what might be. When she stood, her expression had set into something harder, more resolved. "Mr. Mercer." She turned to face him. "I need you to understand something. I am not here under false pretenses. A mail-order marriage is a business arrangement. I expected to earn my place through labor, to fulfill the duties of a wife in exchange for security. I cannot do that right now, but I intend to honor our agreement once I have healed. I am not seeking pity. What if I told you I am not interested in that kind of arrangement? Her face went carefully blank. Then I would ask what arrangement you are interested in, so I can determine if I am capable of meeting its terms. How about this? He said it slowly. You come to my ranch. You heal. You get your strength back. During that time, you help out however you are able, but only as much as you are able. No expectations beyond that. When you are well, we talk again about what comes next. Maybe that is marriage. Maybe it is me helping you get settled somewhere else. Maybe it is something neither of us has thought of yet. Disbelief colored her voice. You would do that? Just give me time with no guarantee I will stay? Miss Ashford, I have been alone for 5 years. Another few months will not kill me. He almost smiled. And frankly, I could use the help around the place, even if all you can manage is pointing out what needs doing while I do it. She studied him for a long moment, those hazel eyes searching his face for the trap, the angle, the hidden cost. You are not what I expected. Neither are you. Figured we would start even. The ghost of a smile touched her lips, then vanished as it pulled at the split. She winced, touched it gingerly. When does the pain stop? Eventually. But it gets better bit by bit. You will notice it less as time goes on. I am not sure I want to notice it less. The words came quiet, almost to herself. Forgetting seems dangerous. Josiah understood that. Some pain was meant to be remembered, written into the body as warning. He said nothing, just waited until she was ready to continue the journey. By late afternoon, they reached the boundary of his land. He knew it by a distinctive rock formation and the way the grassland began to rise toward the foothills. Another hour brought them to the homestead itself. It sat in a shallow valley, sheltered from the worst winds by cottonwoods on one side and rising ground on the other. The cabin was log construction, solid if plain, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that looked out over miles of grass and sky. A weathered barn stood nearby, corrals extending from it. Beyond, cattle moved slowly across the grazing land in their eternal search for better grass. Josiah pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. It is not much. Roof does not leak. Chimney draws well. Water comes from a spring 50 yards that direction, never goes dry. Cora climbed down before he could help, moving with careful deliberation. She turned slowly, taking in the homestead, the valley, the mountains catching the last gold of afternoon light. When she faced him, something had shifted in her expression. Something had opened. It is beautiful, she said simply. Josiah blinked. Most people saw isolation and hardship. She saw beauty. I think, she said slowly, that it is the first place I have seen in a very long time where no one is watching, where there are no eyes judging, no voices criticizing, no hands. She stopped herself, pressed her lips together. Yes, Mr. Mercer, I think it is beautiful. He showed her inside. The cabin was 2 rooms, a main living space with fireplace, table, chairs, and kitchen along one wall. A smaller bedroom with a bed and dresser, clean but spare, furnished for function. Bedroom is yours, he said, setting her trunk at the foot of the bed. I will take the loft. He gestured to the ladder leading up into the eaves. It is where I usually sleep anyway. He paused at the doorway, then reached into his pocket and produced a small iron latch. He held it up so she could see it clearly. I am going to install this on the inside of this door, right now, tonight, so you have a lock that only works from your side. Cora stared at the latch. Then she stared at him. Her lower lip trembled once before she caught it between her teeth. You are giving me a door I can close, she whispered. Everyone deserves that. He installed the latch while she unpacked the few things she needed for the night. Then he built up the fire and began pulling together a simple supper. The routine steadied him, gave his hands purpose, while his mind tried to process what he had done. He had upended his entire existence for a stranger, invited danger to his doorstep for a woman he did not know. It should have felt reckless. Instead, it felt like the first true thing in years. They ate at the table as darkness filled the valley and stars emerged overhead in impossible numbers. Stew from preserved venison, bread 2 days old, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Cora ate slowly, carefully, but she ate. That seemed like progress. How long have you been here? She asked. 5 years. Built the cabin myself. Cleared the land. Started the herd. It must be lonely. Sometimes. But lonely is better than some alternatives. She nodded as though she understood completely. Perhaps she did. My parents died when I was 12, she said quietly. Cholera. I went to live with my father's brother and his wife in Boston. They were proper people, very concerned with appearances. Her voice flattened, emotion carefully stripped away. My uncle had specific ideas about how a young woman should behave, and specific punishments for failing to meet his expectations. Josiah's hands clenched beneath the table. 10 years, she continued. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and because he controlled what little inheritance my parents left. On my 22nd birthday 2 months ago, that inheritance became legally mine. Not much, but enough to pay the agency fee and buy passage west. She met his eyes across the table, the firelight catching the damage on her face and turning it to shadow and gold. He did not want me to leave. We disagreed violently. She set down her coffee cup. So now you know, I am not some innocent seeking adventure. I am a woman who endured abuse for a decade and only found courage when there was money involved. That is not cowardice, Josiah said firmly. That is survival. And getting out took more courage than staying ever could. She reached into her carpet bag and withdrew a small square of fabric, old and soft, embroidered with tiny lavender flowers and thread that had faded but still held its pattern. She smoothed it between her fingers with the tenderness reserved for sacred things. My mother's, she said. The only thing of hers I have left. I kept it hidden so he could not take it from me. She pressed the handkerchief to her lips briefly, then folded it and held it against her chest. After a moment, she stood. Thank you, Mr. Mercer, for not being sensible. Then she went into the bedroom and closed the door, and Josiah heard the soft click of the new latch sliding into place. That small sound, the sound of a woman locking a door because she could, because someone had given her the means to choose her own safety, settled something deep in his chest. He stood alone in the cabin, listening to the night, wind in the cottonwoods, the distant call of an owl, logs settling in the fireplace. He had spent 5 years building a life defined by the absence of complication, by walls so high and thick that nothing could reach him. In a single day, that had changed. He should be concerned, should be planning for the trouble that was surely coming from Boston, from a man with money and connections who did not accept defiance. But standing there in his rough cabin, knowing a stranger slept in his bed with her mother's handkerchief tucked under her pillow, Josiah found he did not regret the choice. Whatever came next, he would face it knowing he had chosen compassion over convenience. Outside, the stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. Inside, two broken people rested under the same roof, neither knowing yet what they had begun to build together or what it would cost them before the story found its end. But in the morning, there would be coffee. There would be work. There would be the slow, patient business of healing. And somewhere in Boston, a man named Edmund Ashford was making inquiries. The first morning arrived with a softness that seemed almost apologetic, as though the Montana sky understood the fragility of what lay beneath it. Josiah woke in the loft to the gray light that preceded true sunrise, his body responding to years of habit before his mind fully engaged. He lay still for a moment, listening to the unfamiliar silence below. No movement, no sounds of waking. She was still asleep then. Good. She needed it more than she would ever admit. He descended the ladder quietly, boots making only whisper-soft contact with the rungs. The main room was cool, the fire reduced to embers that glowed faintly in the hearth. He rebuilt it with the patience of long practice, adding kindling until flames caught and began their slow work of driving back the chill. Only when the fire was steady did he allow himself to glance at the closed bedroom door. Still shut, still silent. The latch still engaged from the inside. He moved through his morning routine with deliberate quiet. Stoked the stove, set coffee to boil, sliced bread from the loaf. The familiar actions gave structure to a situation that had none. He had brought a stranger into his home, a woman carrying wounds both visible and buried, and now they had to figure out how to exist in the same space without breaking each other further. The coffee had just finished when he heard the soft scrape of the latch sliding open. He did not turn immediately, gave her a moment to gather herself before facing the day. When he looked, he found her standing in the doorway wearing the same gray dress from the night before, hair in a braid slightly disheveled from sleep. The bruising looked darker in the morning light, the swelling perhaps worse. She held herself carefully, one hand pressed to her ribs. "Morning," he said. "Coffee is ready." "Good morning." Her voice was rough with sleep and something else. Pain maybe, or the residue of dreams he did not want to imagine. "I did not mean to sleep so late." He glanced at the window where dawn was just beginning to color the sky. "It is barely past sunrise. That is not late. On this ranch, you sleep until you are rested. That is the only rule that matters right now." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handed her one. She wrapped both hands around it as though drawing warmth from the metal itself. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in months." "Your bed is comfortable." "Good. Sit down. I will make breakfast. I can help. Cora." He kept his voice gentle but firm, using her given name for the first time without thinking about it. "You can help by sitting down and drinking that coffee before you fall over. I have been feeding myself for 5 years. I can manage one more morning." She sat, but reluctance showed in every line of her body. Josiah understood. Accepting help felt like weakness, like debt accumulating with interest she could not calculate. He had felt the same when injury or illness forced him to depend on others. The trick was learning that accepting help did not mean surrendering dignity. That lesson took time. She would get there. He fried eggs and salt pork, toasted bread over the open flame. As he cooked, he felt her watching him, assessing, trying to figure out who he was, what he wanted, where the trap would spring. He did not blame her. Trust had to be earned, especially from someone who had watched it shatter so many times the pieces no longer fit together. They ate in a silence that felt less like the absence of words and more like the presence of something neither of them was ready to name. Outside, the valley woke around them, birds calling their territorial claims, cattle lowing in the distance, wind moving through new grass with a sound like breathing. It was a world Josiah had grown so accustomed to that he barely heard it anymore. But watching Cora listen, really listen, her head tilted slightly, her eyes soft with something close to wonder, he heard it fresh. "It is so quiet," she said after a while. In Boston, there was always noise. Carriages, vendors, construction, people. Even at night, the city never truly slept. She set down her fork. "This is different. Good different or bad different?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I am not sure yet, but it is not uncomfortable." After breakfast, Josiah headed outside to begin the day's work while Cora insisted on cleaning the dishes despite his protests. He let her have this small victory, understanding the need to contribute something, anything, to feel less like a burden and more like a person with purpose. But he watched through the window as she moved around the kitchen, noting how she favored her left side, how she stopped periodically to breathe through waves of pain that turned her face white. When she reached up to place a plate on a higher shelf and went pale as old paper, he was through the door before he made the conscious decision to move. "That is enough." He took the plate from her hands carefully. "The rest can wait. I have barely done anything. You have done plenty. Now you are going to sit on the porch, drink some water, and rest while I handle the morning chores. I did not come here to be useless." The frustration in her voice was raw, and Josiah recognized it for what it was. Not anger at him, but rage at the body that had been broken, at the circumstances that had broken it, at the cruel mathematics of healing that demanded patience from someone who had already waited too long for too many things. "You are not useless. You are hurt. There is a difference. Your body needs time, and pushing too hard only makes it take longer." He softened his tone. "Give yourself permission to be human, Cora. The ranch will still be here when you are stronger." She looked like she wanted to argue, but whatever she saw in his face stopped her. "I do not know how to just sit still." "Then do not sit still. Walk the property if you want. Find a spot in the sun. Explore. Just do not lift anything heavy or push through pain." He grabbed his hat from the peg by the door. "I will be in the barn if you need anything." The morning passed in the rhythm Josiah knew by heart. Mucking stalls, checking fence lines, ensuring the cattle had water and had not gotten themselves into the kind of trouble that cattle seem to invent as a personal challenge to every rancher who ever lived. The work was hard but honest, the kind that left muscles tired and mind mercifully quiet. He was mending a section of corral fence when he spotted her. She had wandered out from the cabin, moving slowly toward where the spring fed into a small pool before continuing downhill. She wore a shawl over her dress despite the warming day and walked like someone relearning the mechanics of her own body. When she reached the pool, she simply stood there, staring down at the clear water, her reflection looking back at her with its map of bruises and its questions. After 15 minutes, she lowered herself carefully to a flat rock at the water's edge, pulled her knees up, wrapped her arms around them, and rested her chin on her folded arms. From that distance, she looked impossibly small. A solitary figure in a landscape that reduced human concerns to their proper scale. Josiah returned to his work, but he kept her in his peripheral vision all morning. The days that followed established a pattern that felt less like routine and more like negotiation. Cora pushed to help more than Josiah thought wise. Josiah pushed back, insisting she rest. They met somewhere in the middle, two stubborn people finding the boundary between concern and condescension, between independence and foolishness. She took over the cooking first, moving around the small kitchen with increasing confidence despite the injury to her ribs. On the fourth morning, Josiah descended the ladder to find her already at the stove, stirring something that smelled like a memory he could not quite place. "What is that?" "Porridge." She did not turn from the stove. "My mother used to make it on cold mornings. I found oats in your stores and thought I would try to remember how." They ate the sweet, warm porridge while dawn painted the windows gold, and the taste of cinnamon and brown sugar did something to the air inside that cabin, made it feel less like shelter and more like the beginnings of a home. Halfway through the meal, Cora set down her spoon. "The swelling has gone down, and my ribs hurt less when I breathe." "Good. I was thinking I might try some light work today. There is a garden patch behind the cabin." Josiah had planted vegetables each spring out of habit more than purpose, usually letting half go to seed while he ate the same monotonous meals week after week. It could use attention. "Then I will give it attention." She met his eyes across the table. "I need to feel useful, Josiah. Sitting idle makes me think too much." He understood that better than she knew. "All right. But you stop if anything hurts. Deal." She worked the garden through the morning while Josiah rode out to check cattle in the far pasture. When he returned in early afternoon, the transformation stopped him in his tracks. The weeds were gone, the rows clearly defined. The whole plot looked more hopeful than it had in years. Cora sat on the porch steps, dirt under her fingernails, hair escaping its braid, face flushed with effort and something he had not seen on her before. Satisfaction. The quiet pride of someone who had made something better through their own labor. "You have been busy," he said. "It is a good garden. Or it will be, with some attention." She studied him as he unsaddled his horse. "You planted a lot of variety. Tomatoes, beans, squash, carrots, onions. We will eat well come harvest." "We." The word landed between them, casual but weighted with assumption. They had been carefully avoiding talk of the future, staying in the safe territory of each immediate day. Now she had claimed a place in his autumn, his harvest, as though her presence was assumed. "Yeah," Josiah said slowly, testing the word and finding it fit. "We will." That evening, Cora unpacked her trunk in earnest for the first time. Until now, she had been living out of it as though she might need to leave at any moment, one foot already aimed at the door. Watching her hang her few dresses on pegs, arrange her brush and mirror on the dresser, place 3 worn books in the shelf, felt significant in a way that tightened something behind his ribs. She was settling in, putting down roots in the small space he had given her. "I brought books," she said, holding them out. "Not many, only what fit. But I thought you might want to borrow them." Josiah accepted them with more reverence than he had shown anything in years. It had been so long since he had anything new to read. "This one," she said, pointing to the thickest volume, "is Shakespeare. Probably not very useful on a ranch. Never know. Might come in handy if the cattle start demanding sonnets." She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her before she could stop it, a sound that transformed her face and made her look younger, less haunted, more like the woman she might have been if life had been kinder. The split in her lip pulled and she winced, touching it gingerly, but the laughter stayed in her eyes. Josiah found himself wanting to hear that sound again, wanting it the way dry land wants rain. 2 weeks after her arrival, the incident with the horse changed everything between them. Josiah's oldest horse, a bay gelding named Dutch who had been with him since Wyoming, stepped wrong coming down a rocky slope and twisted his foreleg badly. The joint swelled to twice its size within hours, hot to the touch, the animal standing three-legged and trembling in the barn. Josiah examined it with the grim resignation of a man who had seen this before. A horse that could not walk was a horse that could not live on a working ranch. He went to the cabin for his rifle. Cora met him at the door. "What happened?" I heard him screaming from the garden. "Dutch hurt his leg. Bad." He reached past her for the rifle propped against the wall. "I need to put him down." "Wait." She grabbed his arm. "Let me look at it first." "Cora, there is nothing to be done for a leg like that. Let me look." Something in her voice, a certainty that cut through his own resignation, made him pause. She crossed to her trunk and pulled out a thick, battered book that he had not noticed before, its cover worn soft with handling, pages marked with dozens of scraps of fabric and pressed leaves. "This was my mother's," she said, already flipping through it. "She studied plants and their medicinal properties. Taught me before she died, and I kept learning from her notes." She found the page she wanted, ran her finger down cramped handwriting. "This is not a break. You said the joint is swollen and hot. That is likely a severe sprain or a strained tendon. It can heal if treated properly." She looked up at him, and in her eyes was a challenge. "Give me 2 weeks. If he is not improving, you can do what you think necessary. But let me try." Josiah looked at the rifle in his hands, then at the woman holding her dead mother's book of remedies, asking him to trust her with something she cared about saving. He set the rifle down. 2 weeks. She worked on Dutch with a focus and competence that stripped away every assumption Josiah had made about who she was. She mixed poultices from herbs she found growing wild near the spring, and others she cultivated from seeds in her trunk. She wrapped the leg in clean bandages she tore from one of her own petticoats. She sat with the horse for hours, keeping him calm, talking to him in a low, steady voice, while she applied cold compresses and then warm ones in alternation. On the 3rd day, Dutch put weight on the leg for the first time. On the 7th, he was walking, stiffly, but walking. By the end of 2 weeks, the swelling had reduced to almost nothing, and the horse moved with only the slightest hesitation. Josiah stood at the barn door watching Cora lead Dutch in slow circles around the corral, the horse following her like a dog, his great head lowered to her shoulder. She had saved an animal he had been ready to shoot, not with strength or force, but with knowledge, patience, and a dead woman's book of healing. She caught him watching and stopped, one hand resting on Dutch's neck. He is going to be fine. Another week of easy movement and he will be sound. You saved him, Josiah said. That is not the work of someone useless. Something shifted in her expression. The careful blankness she wore like armor cracked just for a moment, and what showed beneath was so raw and hungry for recognition that Josiah had to look away. My mother would have done the same, Cora said quietly. She believed everything alive deserved the chance to heal. She does sound like she was a good woman. The best I ever knew. The following Sunday, Josiah suggested they ride to the northern boundary of his property, where a creek ran through a stand of aspens. "There is something I want to show you," he said, "if you are up for the ride." They rode north across his land as the day opened wide and blue above them. The creek, when they reached it, ran clear and cold over smooth stones. The aspens were just beginning to leaf out, their shimmer not yet in full effect but promising. "This is my favorite place on the property," he said quietly. "I come here when I need to think. I wanted you to see it, wanted you to know it exists in case you ever need somewhere to go." "A refuge within the refuge," she said. "Something like that." They sat on the bank, and after a long silence, Cora asked the question she had been carrying since Benson Creek. "Why are you really doing this? And please do not say it is just the right thing to do. People do not upend their lives for strangers out of abstract principle." Josiah considered his answer. She deserved honesty. "5 years ago, I was working a ranch in Wyoming. Good job, decent pay. There was a woman there, the owner's daughter, Sarah. We were friendly, more than friendly. Talked about marriage. Her father did not approve. Thought I was too rough, too poor. He forbade her from seeing me, and when she defied him, he locked her in her room for 3 days. When she still refused to give me up, he beat her. Not in anger, methodically, like breaking a horse." Cora had gone very still beside him. "I found out when her younger brother came to get me. By the time I got there, she was unconscious. Her father stood in the doorway and told me if I did not leave immediately, he would have me arrested. Said Sarah had brought it on herself through disobedience." He paused. "I left, rode away, and I have regretted it every day since." She survived. Married a banker from Cheyenne 6 months later. Her father arranged it. He finally looked at Cora. "So when you ask why I am doing this, that is why. Because I did not help when I should have. Because I let someone else's cruelty go unchallenged. Because I have been living with the weight of that cowardice ever since, and maybe helping you balances the scales a little." "That is not cowardice," Cora said softly. "You were one man against a powerful rancher. What could you have done?" "Something. Anything. Instead, I ran north and built walls so high nothing could reach me. I think that makes you more trustworthy, not less." Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Recognition of shared damage and the weight it carried. Then Josiah reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife with a bone handle worn smooth by decades of use. He held it out to her. "This was my father's. He carried it every day of his life. I have carried it every day since he died." Cora looked at the knife, then at him, confusion and something deeper flickering across her face. "I want you to have it, not because you need protecting. You have already proven you can handle that yourself. But so you know that whatever happens, you have something in your hand that belongs to someone who trusts you completely." She took the knife carefully, felt its weight, the warmth it still held from his pocket. She turned it over in her palm, studying the worn bone, the brass rivets, the blade that had been sharpened so many times. It had grown thin as a whisper. "I will keep it safe," she said quietly. "I know you will." From that day forward, the knife lived in her apron pocket like a talisman, close and constant. A piece of him she carried even when he was in the far pasture and she was alone with the garden and the quiet. That same evening, while checking the perimeter of the property as he did each night before dark, Josiah noticed something that stopped him cold. In the soft earth along the eastern ridge, half a mile from the cabin, he found hoof prints, not from his horses. He knew the shape and weight of every animal he owned. These were different. A single rider moving along the ridgeline, stopping at the point that offered the clearest view down into the valley and directly at the cabin. Someone had been watching them. He knelt beside the tracks, reading them the way he read weather, the way he read cattle. Recent. Within the last day or two. The horse had stood in one spot long enough to shift its weight several times, which meant the rider had stayed for a while, watching, studying the layout of the ranch, the routines, the comings and goings. Near the hoof prints, pressed into the dirt beside a flat rock where someone had sat, Josiah found the crushed butt of a cigarette. He picked it up, examined it. Not the rough hand-rolled tobacco common to Montana ranch hands and miners. This was manufactured, store-bought, the kind of thing a man from a city might smoke. He pocketed it without a word and walked back to the cabin as the sun dropped behind the mountains and the valley filled with shadow. He did not mention the tracks to Cora. Not yet. She was healing, gaining strength, beginning to smile. He would not take that from her until he had to. But that night he brought the rifle inside and propped it beside his bed in the loft instead of leaving it in the barn. And when he lay in the darkness listening to the night sounds, the wind, the owl, the settling of logs, he listened harder than usual for the sound of hoofbeats that did not belong. Meanwhile, unaware of what Josiah had found, Cora did something small and deliberate that neither of them would understand the significance of until much later. In the last light of evening, she walked to the far corner of the garden near the fence line, knelt in the dirt, and opened a small cloth pouch she had been carrying since Boston. Inside were seeds. Tiny, dark, almost nothing. Rose seeds. Wild roses, the hardy kind that grew along the stone walls of her mother's childhood home in Pennsylvania, the kind that survived poor soil and harsh winters and neglect. Her mother had pressed them into her hands when Cora was 11 years old, a year before the cholera took her. "Keep these," her mother had said. "Plant them wherever you end up. They will grow anywhere, if you give them a chance." Cora had kept them for 11 years through everything. Through the funeral, through the move to Boston, through 10 years of Edmund Ashford's particular cruelty. She had hidden them with the same fierce secrecy she had hidden the lavender handkerchief. They were the last piece of the life she had lost. And she had carried them across a continent on the faith that someday she would find soil worthy of them. She was not sure this was that place. She was not sure of anything. But she pressed the seeds into the Montana dirt anyway, covered them gently, and watered them from the spring. If they grew, it would mean something. What exactly, she could not yet say. But the act of planting felt like the first prayer she had offered in years. 3 weeks after Cora's arrival, a letter found its way to the ranch through a neighbor 15 miles south who had received it by mistake. The neighbor, a rancher named Willard, who made the trip every few months to check on the hermit of the northern range, handed it to Josiah with a shrug and a curious glance at the woman hanging laundry behind the cabin. Josiah read it in the barn, away from Cora's eyes. The letter was from Howard Brennan at the agency in Helena. Brief and urgent. Mr. Ashford has made formal inquiries regarding Miss Ashford's whereabouts. He has contacted our agency directly, claiming his niece was taken against her will. We have refused to provide information, but I must warn you that he appears to have engaged private investigators. I recommend, in the strongest possible terms, that you consider making the arrangement with Miss Ashford permanent. A married woman has legal protections that an unmarried woman living with an unrelated man does not. Specifically, marriage would dissolve Mr. Ashford's guardianship claim entirely. The agency also cautioned that Edmund Ashford had connections in law enforcement and the judiciary. A man like that did not simply give up. Josiah found Cora in the garden, kneeling among the young tomato plants she had coaxed from nothing. The late afternoon light caught her hair, which had grown looser from its usual severe braid in the week since her arrival. The bruises were nearly gone now, faded to yellow-green shadows that would soon disappear entirely. She moved with more ease, more confidence, the broken ribs knitting themselves back together beneath skin that was beginning to brown in the Montana sun. She looked up when she heard him approach, and the openness in her expression, the unguarded ease she was only just beginning to allow herself, made what he had to tell her that much harder. He handed her the letter without preamble. She read it standing in the garden with dirt on her hands and sunlight in her hair, and he watched the openness drain from her face, replaced by the careful blankness she had worn when she stepped off that stagecoach. "He is looking for me," she said. Her voice was flat, but her hands trembled, making the paper shake. "He is. The agency says we should marry. That is what they recommend." She folded the letter precisely, once, twice, 3 times, until it was small enough to close her fist around. "I will not marry you because I am afraid. That is not fair to either of us. No, it is not, and I am not asking you to. Then what do? We keep doing what we are doing, building this partnership, learning each other, and we stay prepared. If the threat becomes real, if he actually sends someone, we move quickly, but not before." She studied him for a long time, her hazel eyes searching for something she seemed afraid to find. "And if something does grow between us, something more than partnership, then we figure that out when we get there. Together." She nodded slowly and handed the letter back. Together, then. But that night, after she had gone to bed and the latch had clicked into place, Josiah sat alone by the dying fire and faced what the letter had confirmed. It was not just the threat from Boston that kept him awake, though that was real enough. It was the other thing, the thing growing between them that he had been pretending not to notice. He listened for her footsteps each morning before he was fully awake. He noticed when she smiled and when she did not. He cared about her opinion on things that had never required a second perspective. He found excuses to be near the garden when she was working, to linger at the table after meals, to extend conversations that had no practical purpose. He was falling for her, slowly, carefully. Against every wall he had built and every promise he had made to himself after Wyoming. And the terrifying part, the part that kept him staring at the ceiling long after the fire had gone to embers, was that he was almost certain she was falling too. He could see it in the way she watched him when she thought he was not looking, in the way her voice softened when she said his name, in the way she had started reaching for his hand when the wagon hit rough ground on their trips to check the far pasture. Something was growing between them, as surely as the seeds she had planted along the fence line. Something neither of them had planned for, neither of them was ready for, and neither of them seemed able to stop. And somewhere in Boston, Edmund Ashford was spending money and making promises and tightening the net around a niece who had dared to run. The tracks on the eastern ridge appeared again 3 days later. Same horse, same spot. The cigarette butts multiplied. Whoever was watching had not lost interest. They had settled in. Josiah said nothing to Cora, but he started sleeping with the rifle within arm's reach, and he began to vary his routines, taking different routes to check cattle, returning at unpredictable times. He reinforced the cabin door with an additional bar. He taught Cora how to load and fire the shotgun that hung above the fireplace, presenting it as a practical skill for ranch life. She took to it with the same focused competence she brought to everything, and if she suspected his reasons were more urgent than he let on, she did not say so. She simply learned to shoot, and she kept the knife he had given her close at hand, and she watched the eastern ridge with eyes that had spent 10 years learning to recognize danger before it arrived. They came on a Tuesday morning in late July when the summer heat had turned the grasslands to gold and the sky stretched overhead like a bowl of unbroken blue. Josiah was replacing a rotted fence post near the barn when the sound reached him. Hoofbeats, 2 horses, moving fast from the south. He straightened and his hand found the rifle leaning against the fence rail before his mind had fully registered the threat. 5 months of vigilance had turned instinct into reflex. 2 riders crested the rise, silhouettes against the morning sun, moving with the particular urgency of men on business rather than pleasure. Josiah stepped into the open where he could be clearly seen, rifle held low but ready, and waited. Cora emerged from the cabin, drawn by the sound. He saw her freeze in the doorway, one hand gripping the frame, the other pressed flat against her stomach as though bracing for a blow that had not yet landed. "Get inside," he said without turning his head. "Bar the door." She hesitated. "Cora, now." She retreated. He heard the door close, the heavy bar drop into its brackets. Good. Whatever was coming, she was behind solid timber with a loaded shotgun within reach and the knowledge of how to use it. The riders slowed as they approached, reining in at a respectful distance. Both were dressed for hard travel, coated in dust, carrying themselves with the watchful alertness of men accustomed to situations that could turn unpleasant. The older one had iron gray hair and eyes that calculated everything they touched. The younger one sat his horse with the restless energy of someone who would rather be anywhere else. "Afternoon," the older man said, touching his hat brim. "You would be Josiah Mercer. I would. And you would be on my land without invitation. Name is Silas Greer, out of Helena. This is my associate, Mr. Cole. We are looking for a young woman, Miss Corinne Ashford. We have reason to believe she may be in this area." The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. Josiah kept his face empty, his voice level. "And what business would you have with Miss Ashford? Her family is concerned about her welfare." Greer's tone was professionally smooth, rehearsed. The voice of a man who delivered unpleasant news for a living and had learned to wrap it in reasonable language. Her uncle, Mr. Edmund Ashford of Boston, is quite worried. She left rather suddenly, without proper arrangements or supervision. Supervision. Josiah let the word hang in the hot air between them, let its implications settle over the scene like dust. She is a grown woman, not a child requiring supervision. Be that as it may, Mr. Ashford holds legal guardianship until she reaches 25 or marries. He has rights where her welfare is concerned. Greer's eyes moved past Josiah toward the cabin, toward the closed door and the barred windows. Now, is she here or not? The cabin door opened. Cora stepped onto the porch carrying the shotgun, though she held it pointed at the ground. A woman making a statement rather than a threat. She had changed in the months since her arrival, and the change was visible even at a distance. The bruises were long gone. Her skin had browned from weeks of garden work and sunshine. She stood straight, shoulders squared, chin raised, and if her hands trembled on the gun stock, it did not show from where the riders sat. "I am here," she said. "You can stop pretending this is about my welfare." Greer's expression did not flicker. "Miss Ashford, your uncle has been quite distressed about your disappearance. He is prepared to overlook your indiscretion if you return willingly." Indiscretion. The word came out of her mouth like something rotten. Is that what he is calling it? Not escape, not survival. Indiscretion. "Miss Ashford, I do not know what stories you have been telling." Stories. She descended the porch steps slowly, deliberately, each step a declaration. "Would you like to see the scars, Mr. Greer? The ones that do not show on my face anymore. I can catalog them for you." Her voice did not waver. It did not rise. It carried across the yard with the terrible calm of someone who had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, who had imagined standing before the machinery of her uncle's reach and refusing to be ground beneath it. "There is the mark on my shoulder where he threw me against a fireplace poker. The burn on my wrist where he held my hand over a candle flame to teach me about eternal consequences. The place on my ribs where they did not set quite right after he kicked me for speaking out of turn at dinner." Cole, the younger associate, shifted in his saddle. His jaw tightened. He looked at the horizon, at his horse's mane, at anything other than the woman standing in the yard describing her own destruction with the precision of a surveyor mapping damaged land. Greer remained unmoved. "Your uncle describes a rebellious niece who required firm discipline. My uncle is a liar and a sadist who enjoyed causing pain. And I will die before I go back to him. That may not be your choice to make." Greer reached into his saddlebag and produced a folded document. "I have a court order here granting Mr. Ashford temporary custody pending a hearing on your mental competence. A doctor's affidavit states you have been experiencing delusions, making unfounded accusations." "Convenient," Josiah said quietly. A doctor who never examined her, declaring her incompetent. I am guessing Ashford paid well for that paper. The court found it credible. Greer extended the document. "I am authorized to take Miss Ashford into custody for her own protection. You are not taking her anywhere. Mr. Mercer, I understand you may have developed an attachment, but interfering with a legal order is a serious matter. You could face charges. Then I will face them." Josiah raised the rifle slightly, not aiming, not yet, but making his position clear in the only language men like Greer understood. "She says she is not going. I say she is not going. That document is worth less than the paper it is printed on out here, and we both know it." Silence. The afternoon sun pressed down on the scene like a hand. Somewhere behind the barn, a horse stamped and blew. A hawk circled overhead, drawing lazy spirals against the blue, utterly indifferent to the human drama playing out below. Greer studied Josiah for a long moment, performing calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics. Then he refolded the document and returned it to his saddlebag. Mr. Ashford will be disappointed. He was hoping this could be resolved peacefully. It is peaceful. Nobody has been shot yet. Yet. Greer gathered his reins. We will be going. But this is not over, Mercer. Mr. Ashford has resources, connections. He will find other ways. Let him try. The riders turned their horses. But before they had gone 20 yards, Greer called back over his shoulder with the casual precision of a man delivering a knife wrapped in conversation. One more thing. That court order specifies unmarried status. If Miss Ashford were to marry, guardianship would transfer to her husband. Just thought you should know. Then they were gone, dust rising behind them in a golden cloud that hung in the slanting light long after the hoofbeats faded. Josiah lowered the rifle slowly. His hands were trembling, though whether from anger or spent adrenaline he could not tell. Behind him he heard Cora's sharp intake of breath, then the rustle of fabric as she sat down hard on the porch steps. He set the rifle against the railing and turned to find her with her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. He crossed to her, knelt on the step below. Hey, they are gone. For now. Her voice was muffled, but he meant what he said. My uncle will not stop. He will send others. Find legal channels. Bribe officials. Whatever it takes. He cannot stand being defied. Then we deal with whatever comes. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and rested his hand on her shoulder. She did not flinch. That alone measured the distance they had traveled since April. I have brought this to your door, she said, lowering her hands. Her eyes were red but dry, the tears already suppressed. Put you at risk. You could be arrested for harboring me, for interfering with that order. That order is a piece of paper signed by a judge who never heard your side. It means nothing except that your uncle has money. There is only one way to stop him legally. You heard what Greer said. Marriage would end the guardianship. I know. I will not ask that of you. Will not trap you because of my problems. Josiah sat back on his heels. The light was fading, the valley filling with the soft blue of early evening. Behind them the cabin waited, solid and plain. The home they had been building without calling it that. Around them the ranch spread in every direction, the land he had claimed and worked and loved in the only way he knew how, through labor and solitude and the stubborn refusal to give up. He looked at this woman who had arrived broken and desperate, and who now stood down hired men with steel in her spine, who had saved his horse with her dead mother's remedies, who had turned his bare survival into something that resembled living, who made him hear birdsong again after 5 years of silence. What if it is not a trap? He said quietly. She stared at him. What if it is not about obligation or legal protection or solving a problem? What if it is about two people who have been circling each other for months, finally admitting what has been building between them since the day you stepped off that stagecoach, and I decided that doing the right thing mattered more than being safe? He took her hands, felt them trembling in his, held them steady. Somewhere along the way you stopped being a stranger and started being mine. And I want to be yours, if you will have me. Not because some man in Boston says so, because I choose it. Because we both choose it. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You are sure? Because once we do this, there is no undoing it. You will be tied to me, to my problems, to whatever consequences follow. Cora. He cupped her face gently, thumbs brushing the tears away. I am already tied to you. Have been since I decided compassion mattered more than convenience. Marriage just makes it official. She searched his face, looking for doubt, for obligation, for anything that might suggest duty rather than desire. Whatever she found must have satisfied her, because she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you, Josiah Mercer. Not because we have to, because I want to. I love you," she said, the words tumbling out as though they had been pressing against her teeth for weeks. "I know it is too soon and maybe I should not say it, but I love you. I love you too. Have for a while now, if I am honest." "Then why did you not say anything?" "Because I wanted you to heal first, wanted you to choose me freely, not from gratitude or fear or because you felt there was no other option. And now it is real. Now we get to build whatever comes next." They rode into Benson Creek the following morning. Cora wore the blue calico dress she had arrived in, mended and cleaned until it looked almost new. Josiah wore his only white shirt and had submitted to a shave and an actual visit to the barber, who expressed the same shocked delight as the last time. Judge Harlan was found at his usual post in the saloon, a corner table with whiskey and legal documents in equal measure. He was a barrel-chested man with a white beard and eyes that missed nothing despite the drink. "Marriage, is it?" the judge said when Josiah explained their purpose. "You two in some kind of hurry?" "We would like it done today, sir." "Any particular reason for the urgency?" Cora answered before Josiah could. "An uncle who believes he has legal guardianship over me. We would prefer to resolve the situation definitively." "Honest answer. I appreciate that." Harlan drained his glass and stood with surprising steadiness. "All right, I will do it. But I want to speak with the lady privately first. Make sure she knows what she is agreeing to." Josiah left reluctantly, stood on the saloon porch while inside the judge questioned Cora about her circumstances, her intentions, her state of mind. The minutes stretched. When the doors finally swung open, Harlan was shrugging into his coat. Satisfied she knows her own mind and is not being coerced. Let us get this done. They stood in front of the territorial office in the afternoon sun. The clerk Morris served as witness alongside the blacksmith, pulled from his forge and irritated about it. The ceremony was brief, Harlan moving through the legal language with the efficiency of long practice. "Do you, Josiah Mercer, take this woman as your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Corinne Ashford, take this man as your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife. Kiss her if you are so inclined, or do not. Makes no legal difference." Josiah looked at Cora and saw his own wonder reflected back. He leaned down and kissed her gently, carefully, a promise sealed in front of witnesses and God and the dusty street of a town too stubborn to die. Something passed between them in that contact that neither could have put into words. The choosing made visible. The future agreed upon. They rode home under a sky that darkened with approaching storm, reaching the cabin just as the first drops began to fall. By the time Josiah had the horses settled, rain was hammering the roof, and thunder rolled across the valley like the sound of something vast turning over in its sleep. Inside, Cora had lit the lamps and stoked the fire. She handed him a towel when he came through the door dripping, and they stood in the firelight listening to the storm, newly married, the reality of what they had done settling around them like the weather itself. "I should tell you," Cora said quietly, "that I am not entirely sure what happens now. We are married, which means expectations, arrangements. I know what wives are supposed to do, but I do not know what you expect. Nothing changes unless we both want it to." He cupped her face. "I did not marry you to own you. What happens between us beyond the legal fact is something we decide together." She kissed him then, sudden and fierce, her hands gripping his shirt. He responded carefully, aware of how much trust this demanded, how much courage it took for a woman who had known only cruelty from the people closest to her to reach toward someone and ask to be held. When they pulled apart, breathless, Cora whispered something against his chest. "Stay with me tonight, not the loft." "Here, you are sure?" "I am sure." That night, for the first time, they slept side by side in the bed that had been hers alone since April. No expectations, met or unmet. Just two people who had chosen each other, learning the simple geography of closeness, the weight and warmth of another body as something other than threat. Her hand found his in the darkness. His thumb traced circles on her palm. Rain drummed on the roof, and the fire settled to embers. And somewhere outside, the world was vast and dangerous and full of men who believed they had the right to control what they could not understand. But inside this cabin, inside this bed, inside this moment, two people breathed together and did not let go. 3 weeks later, Sheriff Dawson rode out to deliver news that pulled the ground from beneath their fragile peace. Edmund Ashford had filed a formal complaint alleging the marriage was fraudulent. His lawyers claimed it had been entered into solely to circumvent legal guardianship, and they were demanding an investigation. Dawson needed to interview Cora officially, verify she had married of her own free will. Cora faced the sheriff on the porch with the same steel she had shown Greer, though Josiah noticed the way her hand found the door frame and held on. "I married Josiah Mercer of my own free will because I love him and choose to build a life with him. The fact that it also ended my uncle's control is a benefit, not the motive." Dawson nodded, believed her, filed his report, but warned them before he left that Edmund Ashford had money and connections and patience, and this was unlikely to be the end. That night, Cora sat at the kitchen table and wrote 2 letters by lamplight while Josiah read beside the fire. The first was to the agency in Helena, thanking Howard Brennan for his decency. The second was to her uncle. She did not show Josiah what she wrote. He did not ask. Some words needed to belong only to the person who wrote them. When she finished, she sealed both envelopes and set them on the table with the firm satisfaction of someone who had finally found her voice after years of enforced silence. "Let him choke on the truth for once," she said. Then she drafted a third document, more careful than the others. A formal legal proposal offering to renounce her remaining inheritance in exchange for the permanent dissolution of Edmund Ashford's guardianship and the cessation of all legal harassment. She included sworn statements from Judge Harlan and Sheriff Dawson attesting to the legitimacy of her marriage. She sent everything through 3 separate channels. Then she stood, crossed to where Josiah sat, and took his hand. "Whatever comes back from Boston," she said, "we face it together." He pulled her close, pressed his lips to her hair. Together. Outside, the summer darkness was alive with cricket song and the distant murmur of the creek. The stars turned overhead in their ancient patterns, and the ranch settled into the sounds of night. Inside the cabin, lamplight pooled warm and golden over the table where 3 sealed letters waited for morning, each one a small act of war waged not with violence, but with truth. And at the far corner of the garden, invisible in the darkness but stubbornly alive, The rose seeds Cora had planted in April had begun to send pale shoots upward through the Montana soil, reaching for light they had not yet found, but somehow trusted was there. September turned the valley to amber, and the air carried the first whisper of something colder waiting beyond the mountains. The ranch had never looked better. Josiah would pause sometimes in the middle of a task, hammer in hand or reins loose across his lap, and marvel at what 5 months of partnership had built. The garden overflowed with produce that Cora harvested and preserved with the focused determination of a woman constructing a fortress one glass jar at a time. Tomatoes became sauce. Cucumbers became pickles. Beans went into brine. The root cellar filled slowly, shelf by shelf, each jar a declaration written in vinegar and salt. I am staying. I am building. This is mine. They had fallen into the rhythms of a real marriage, not the contractual arrangement they had begun with, but something deeper, more textured, woven from the accumulated small choices of daily life. They woke together, worked in parallel, ate facing each other across the table where conversation had grown from cautious exchange to the easy flow of people who had stopped performing and started simply being. Josiah consulted her on decisions he had always made alone and found her perspective valuable in ways that surprised him. She saw patterns he missed, noticed details that escaped him, thought 3 steps ahead where he thought 1. On an evening in mid-September, Cora set down her fork halfway through supper and looked at him with an expression he had not seen before, something between wonder and terror, balanced on an edge so fine it could tip either direction with a breath. I need to tell you something. He set down his own fork, gave her his full attention. I am late. Her hand moved to her stomach, rested there with a tenderness that made the words unnecessary even before she spoke them. My monthly courses, nearly 3 weeks late. I have been regular since I was 14. 3 weeks is significant. The kitchen went very quiet. The fire crackled. Outside, a coyote called across the darkening valley and received no answer. You are sure? I could be wrong. Stress affects these things, and we have had enough of that. But I do not think I am wrong. She met his eyes. How do you feel about it? Josiah crossed to where she sat, knelt before her chair, and covered her hand on her stomach with his own. Tell me how you feel first. Terrified. Happy. Completely unprepared. We have only been married 2 months. I do not know the first thing about being a mother. We are still fighting my uncle's claims. The timing could not be worse. She paused, and what came next was barely a whisper. But I want this. I want a child with you. I want to build a family. Is that foolish? It is the least foolish thing either of us has ever done. They rode to Benson Creek the following week. Dr. Whitfield, a practical man who had served the territory for 20 years, confirmed what they already knew. Approximately 8 weeks along, due late April, perhaps early May, mother healthy, pregnancy progressing normally. He arranged for Mrs. Parnell, the boarding house proprietor who had attended more than a dozen frontier births, to serve as midwife when the time came. On their way out, Mrs. Parnell pressed a packet of herbal tea into Cora's hands. Start drinking this daily at 8 months. It prepares the body. And tell that husband of yours to stop looking like he is about to faint. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. They kept the news to themselves for a while, savoring the private knowledge the way you cup a candle flame against the wind. Something precious and new, belonging only to them before the world got involved. But the world was already involved. It had been all along. In the middle of October, Silas Greer came back. Josiah was alone when it happened, mending the chicken coop Cora had insisted they build now that she had acquired a small flock through trade with their southern neighbor. He heard a single horse approaching from the east, and every nerve in his body went taut before he even looked up. When he did, he saw Greer riding alone. No coal, no second horse, no pretense of official business. Just a man on a tired mount with information to sell. Greer reined in at a careful distance, reading Josiah's posture and the proximity of the rifle with professional accuracy. "Not here for trouble, Mercer. Here to talk." "5 minutes. Talk then." Greer dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. He looked older than he had in July, the lines around his eyes deeper, the set of his mouth suggesting he had recently swallowed something that disagreed with him. "Your wife's uncle is escalating." Greer spoke without preamble, a man dispensing information he had decided to part with. "He has engaged new lawyers, expensive ones. They are preparing a petition to have Mrs. Mercer declared mentally incompetent by a federal judge. Not a territorial one this time. Federal." The words landed in Josiah's stomach like stones dropped into deep water. "If they succeed, the petition would void your marriage on the grounds that she was not of sound mind when she entered into it. She would revert to his guardianship. And the likely outcome after that would be commitment to a private institution in Boston." Josiah's hand tightened on the fence rail until the wood bit into his palm. "On what grounds?" "The same doctor's affidavit as before, plus additional testimony from household staff in Boston who will swear she exhibited erratic and delusional behavior." Greer's voice carried the flat neutrality of a man reporting facts he found distasteful. "It is manufactured, all of it. But Ashford has the money to make manufactured things look very real in front of the right judge. Why are you telling me this?" Greer was quiet for a moment. "Because I have a daughter. She is 19, lives with her mother in Helena. And when I sat across from your wife in July and watched her describe what that man did to her, I thought about my girl. I thought about what I would do if someone hurt her like that, and then used the law to drag her back for more." He reached into his coat and pulled out a cigarette, the manufactured city kind that Josiah had found crushed into the dirt on the eastern ridge months ago. Lit it, drew deep. "I was the one watching your ranch in May and June. Ashford paid me to observe and report. I told him what I saw. A woman healing. A man treating her decent. A life being built from nothing. He did not care. He wanted her back because she defied him, and he cannot tolerate defiance. It has nothing to do with guardianship or concern or family. It is about control, pure and simple. What do you want, Greer?" "Nothing you can afford." Greer exhaled smoke into the October air. "If you had money, I would offer to go back to Boston and tell him I could not find her. But you do not, and he would just send someone else. Anyway. So instead I am telling you to prepare. He is coming at you with everything he has, and he does not lose. Then there will be a first time." Greer studied him for a long moment, then dropped the cigarette and ground it under his heel. "I hope so, Mercer. For her sake and your daughter's, if you ever have one. I genuinely hope so." He mounted his horse, tipped his hat, and rode east without looking back. Josiah stood in the yard for a long time after Greer disappeared over the ridge. The afternoon light slanted golden across the valley. From inside the cabin, he could hear Cora singing softly as she worked, a melody he did not recognize but that had become as familiar as the wind. She was happy. She was safe. She was carrying their child. And a man in Boston was spending a fortune to drag her back to hell. He told her that evening, because he had promised himself he would never keep things from her. He sat her down at the table and laid out everything Greer had said, watching her face cycle through shock and anger and fear before settling into something harder, something forged. She was quiet for a very long time after he finished. Her hand rested on her stomach where their child was growing, invisible but undeniable, a future that demanded protection. "I will not run," she said finally. "And I will not let anyone put me in a cage. Not a house in Boston. Not an institution. Not anywhere." Her fingers found the handle of the knife Josiah had given her months ago, tucked into her apron pocket where it lived now like a talisman. "Whatever he sends, whatever legal machinery he constructs, I will stand and I will fight, and he will learn that the girl he broke does not exist anymore." Then the weather came for them too. The storm arrived on the last day of October, a full month earlier than any blizzard Josiah had seen in 5 years on this land. It announced itself with a sky that turned the color of a bruise and a wind that screamed down from the mountains with a fury that made the cattle bunch together and the horses press against the barn walls, eyes rolling white. Josiah was in the far pasture when the first snow began to fall. Not gentle flakes, but hard pellets driven horizontal by the wind. He worked frantically to drive the cattle toward the sheltered draws where they might survive, but the storm moved faster than any man on horseback. Within an hour, visibility dropped to nothing. The world became a white roar without direction or horizon. He lost cattle that day. Counted them later when the storm finally broke and found a third of his herd gone, scattered or dead in ravines, or simply vanished into the white. Fences lay flat. The barn roof had partially collapsed under the weight of wet snow. The damage was staggering, months of work undone in hours. But what he found when he finally fought his way back to the cabin was worse. Cora was on the floor. She had gone out during the storm to bring in firewood because the stack inside was running low and the cabin was cooling fast. On the way back, arms full of split logs, she had slipped on the ice that formed on the porch steps. She fell hard on her side, the logs scattering, and the pain that exploded through her abdomen sent her crawling back inside on her hands and knees. Josiah found her lying near the fireplace, curled around herself, one arm wrapped tight across her stomach, and the other hand clutching the lavender handkerchief she had pulled from the bedroom. In her moment of greatest fear, her body reaching for the child inside her. Her hand had reached for the only piece of her mother she had left. The embroidered flowers were crumpled in her white-knuckled grip, as though the fabric itself could hold everything together. "Josiah." Her voice was small and tight with pain. "Something is wrong." He was on his knees beside her before the words were fully spoken, his hands shaking, his mind racing through every terrible possibility at once. "Where does it hurt? Show me exactly." "Here." She guided his hand low on her abdomen. "It is cramping. Sharp. It started when I fell, and it has not stopped." He got her into bed, built the fire until the cabin was nearly too warm, heated water, made her drink, and then rode through the tail end of the storm to the southern neighbor to send word to Dr. Whitfield in Benson Creek. The doctor arrived the next morning on a horse that looked as exhausted as its rider, and he examined Cora with the thoroughness of a man who understood that 2 lives depended on his competence. "The baby is fine," Whitfield said at last, washing his hands in the basin. The heartbeat is strong. The cramping was likely from the impact of the fall, not from any damage to the pregnancy itself. But Mrs. Mercer, you must rest. Complete rest. No lifting, no hauling firewood, no work of any kind for at least 2 weeks, and light duty only after that. Another fall like this one could end differently. After Whitfield left, Cora lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one hand on her stomach, tears sliding silently into her hair. Josiah sat beside her, holding her other hand, saying nothing because there was nothing to say that would make any of it less terrifying. That night, Josiah Mercer broke. It did not happen all at once. It built the way storms build on the Montana horizon, pressure accumulating invisibly until the atmosphere can no longer hold its shape. He sat at the kitchen table after Cora had fallen into an exhausted sleep, and he looked at his hands in the lamplight, hands that had built this cabin, cleared this land, pulled calves in blizzards, held a rifle steady against men who came to take his wife, hands that were supposed to be enough. The ranch was in ruins around him. A third of the cattle dead or scattered, the barn half collapsed, fences down in every direction, months of work and investment destroyed in a single day, and his wife, his pregnant wife, lying in the next room because he had not thought to bring in enough firewood before the storm, because he had been out trying to save cattle instead of keeping her safe. And somewhere in Boston, Edmund Ashford was assembling lawyers and doctors and judges to put her in a cage, and there was nothing Josiah could do about any of it with these hands that suddenly felt useless, these arms that could not hold the world together no matter how tightly he gripped. He put his head down on the table. His shoulders began to shake, not a single tear sliding decorously down a weathered cheek. Not the stoic grief of a man who had learned to suffer quietly. This was the breaking point, the moment when every wall he had built in 5 years of solitude collapsed inward and buried him in the rubble. He wept the way men weep when they have forgotten how, and the forgetting makes it worse, in great shuddering breaths that sounded like they were being torn out of him by force. His fist struck the table once, twice, the wood jumping under the impact, and the sound that came from his throat was not a word, but something older and more raw. The sound of a man confronting the limits of his own strength and finding them insufficient. I cannot protect anyone. The words came broken, mangled by grief. Sarah, Cora, the baby. I cannot keep any of them safe. I build and I work and I fight, and none of it matters, because the world just keeps taking and taking, and I am not enough. I have never been enough. He did not hear the bedroom door open, did not hear the soft pad of bare feet on the wooden floor. Did not know she was there until her hands were in his hair and his face was pressed against the warmth of her body, and she was holding him the way you hold something that might shatter if you let go. Cora stood beside his chair in her nightgown, swaying slightly with fatigue, her belly barely showing at 2 months, but her hands fierce and certain on his bowed head. She had heard everything, the weeping, the words, the fist on the table. She had risen from bed against doctor's orders because the man who had given her a door she could close was falling apart behind it, and she would not let him fall alone. She pulled the lavender handkerchief from her pocket, the same one she had clutched on the floor during the storm, and she pressed it to his face, wiped his eyes with the cloth her mother had embroidered 30 years ago in a house in Pennsylvania that no longer existed. The cloth she had hidden from Edmund for a decade. The cloth she had brought across a continent as proof that love had once existed in her life. Now she used it to dry the tears of the man who had restored her belief that it could exist again. "Listen to me," she said, and her voice was low and steady and carried the weight of absolute conviction. "You have protected me since the day I arrived. Not with fists or guns, though you have done that too. You protected me with a door latch installed on my first night, with patience when I could not bear to be touched, with respect when the world told you I was property to be claimed. You gave me back my name, Josiah. You gave me back my life." She tilted his face up so he had to look at her. "We will survive this. The storm, the ranch, my uncle, all of it, because we are not alone anymore. Neither of us. And tomorrow I am going to end this thing with Edmund Ashford. Not with letters, not with proposals, with everything I have." He pulled her into his lap, carefully, mindful of the baby, and wrapped his arms around her while the lamp flickered and the fire burned low, and the November wind pressed against the cabin walls like a living thing trying to find a way inside. Two people who had every reason to break, holding each other upright in the wreckage, and somehow, in that holding, finding the strength to stand. Cora began her war on a Monday morning in the second week of November, sitting at the kitchen table with paper and ink and the cold, clear focus of a woman who had spent 10 years learning exactly how her enemy thought. She did not write with anger, though anger lived in every line of her body. She wrote with precision, with the methodical care of someone constructing a trap from the same materials that had been used to cage her. Edmund Ashford had wielded law and reputation and the testimony of bought men as weapons against her for months. Now she would turn those weapons around and put them in his hands pointed inward. The first document was a sworn affidavit detailing every incident of abuse she could remember, dated and described with the specificity of someone who had cataloged her own suffering the way a bookkeeper catalogs debts. The scar on her left shoulder from the fireplace poker, December 1874. The burn on her right wrist from the candle flame, March 1876. The broken ribs from being kicked, September 1879. The blackened eye that kept her confined to her room for 2 weeks so no visitors would see, January 1881. On and on, filling 3 pages in her careful hand, each entry a small stone laid into the foundation of a case that could not be ignored. The second document was a letter to Dr. Whitfield requesting a formal medical examination and written report of her physical condition, including documentation of all scarring consistent with long-term abuse. Whitfield wrote out 2 days later, examined her thoroughly, and produced a report that confirmed what her body had been testifying to all along. Multiple healed fractures in the ribs, scarring on the shoulder and wrist consistent with the injuries she described, evidence of repeated trauma spanning years. He signed it, dated it, and affixed his medical credentials. The third document was a compilation of sworn statements from every person who had witnessed her life in Montana. Judge Harlan attested to the legitimacy of her marriage and her clear state of mind during the ceremony. Sheriff Dawson confirmed his investigation had found no evidence of coercion or fraud, and that Mrs. Mercer presented as a competent, articulate woman acting of her own volition. Mrs. Parnell provided testimony about Cora's character, her standing in the community, her obvious devotion to her husband, and the life they were building. Even Willard, the taciturn southern neighbor who rarely spoke more than 10 words at a stretch, put his name to a statement confirming that Mrs. Mercer appeared healthy, content, and entirely in possession of her faculties. Cora assembled everything into a single package with the care of an architect reviewing blueprints. Then she wrote the cover letter. This was the blade. It was addressed not to Edmund directly, but to his lawyer, Martin Whitmore of Whitmore and Associates, Boston. The language was formal, precise, and devastating. Mrs. Corinne Mercer, formerly Ashford, hereby offered the following terms for permanent resolution. She would renounce all claim to her parents' remaining inheritance, the funds Edmund had controlled for a decade. In exchange, Edmund Ashford would file immediate and irrevocable dissolution of guardianship, cease all legal actions against her and her husband, and make no further contact of any kind. Enclosed was the full evidentiary package, the affidavit, the medical report, the sworn statements, everything a federal court would need to see if the matter were ever brought to public hearing. And then the final paragraph, which Cora wrote with a hand that did not tremble. Should Mr. Ashford decline these terms and continue his campaign of legal harassment, I will pursue the matter in open federal court. Every document enclosed here will become part of the public record. Every scar on my body will be examined and testified to under oath. Every witness to my uncle's character and conduct will be called to speak. Mr. Ashford may choose to end this quietly, surrendering a small inheritance in exchange for his privacy and reputation. Or he may choose to fight, in which case I will ensure that every drawing room in Boston knows exactly what kind of man hides behind the Ashford name. The choice is his. The evidence is mine. She sealed the package, addressed it, and set it on the table beside the lamp. Then she sat back in her chair, placed both hands on the slight curve of her stomach, and breathed out slowly. There, she said to the quiet room. Let him calculate the cost of that. Josiah had watched the entire process from across the room, offering help when asked, staying silent when not, understanding that this was her fight to wage in her way. She had spent a decade powerless. This was her reclamation, not just of safety, but of agency, the right to stand on her own feet and swing back with weapons forged from truth rather than money. He mailed the package through 3 separate channels the next time the road to Benson Creek was passable. Direct to the lawyer, through the agency in Helena, and through Sheriff Dawson's office as official correspondence. Then they waited. December came with short days and long nights, and the particular intimacy of 2 people living in close quarters while the world outside turned hostile with cold. Josiah worked on rebuilding what the October storm had destroyed, mending fences, shoring up the damaged barn roof, slowly gathering the surviving cattle back from wherever they had scattered. The work was brutal in the winter cold, but it kept his body occupied while his mind circled the unanswered question hanging over them from Boston. Cora's pregnancy progressed. The morning sickness eased as she entered her 2nd trimester, replaced by a deepening fatigue that she fought against with the same stubbornness she brought to everything. Her belly began to round, subtle at first, then unmistakable. A new geography emerging beneath her dress that changed the way she moved, the way she sat, the way she rested her hands when she was thinking. Josiah caught her talking to the baby sometimes, murmuring while she worked, telling stories about the ranch, about the garden that slept under snow, about the father who would move mountains for a child he had not yet met. The sound of her voice in those moments, soft and private and full of a tenderness she had been storing for years with nowhere to spend it, undid him every time. On a Thursday evening in the 3rd week of December, Josiah carried a large object through the cabin door wrapped in an old horse blanket. He set it down in the main room and pulled the blanket away, and Cora pressed both hands to her mouth. It was a cradle. Hand-built from pine he had cut and seasoned himself, sanded until the wood was smooth as river stone, fitted together with joints so tight you could not slide a blade between them. He had carved small stars along the headboard, simple shapes cut with his father's knife, 5-pointed and slightly uneven in a way that made them more beautiful than perfection would have been. "I have been working on it in the barn when you were not watching," he said, suddenly self-conscious about offering something handmade to a woman who had grown up surrounded by Boston craftsmanship. "It is not fancy, but it is solid. It will last." Cora ran her fingers along the edge of the cradle, tracing the carved stars, feeling the smoothness that spoke of hours of patient labor performed in secret. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with tears that she did not bother to hide. "It is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever made for me." Christmas itself was quiet and unremarkable by the standards of the wider world, but it was theirs. They had no decorations, no grand feast, no traditions to lean on, just each other and the fire and the cradle, standing in the corner like a promise. Cora gave Josiah a shirt she had sewn from fabric hoarded since autumn, every stitch measured and deliberate, and a letter written in her careful hand that said everything she sometimes struggled to speak aloud. He read it by firelight while she watched. When he finished, he could not speak for the thickness in his throat, so he pulled her close and held her and let the silence say what words could not. "Thank you," he managed finally, "for choosing me, for building this with me, for giving me a future I never imagined I would have." "We chose each other," she corrected with her head against his chest. "That is what makes it work." The answer from Boston arrived on a gray morning in the 3rd week of January, carried by Sheriff Dawson himself, who rode out through bitter cold because he understood what the envelope in his saddlebag meant to the people waiting for it. Josiah saw him coming from the barn and felt his stomach clench with a force that made him grip the nearest post. He could not read the sheriff's expression at this distance, could not tell whether the news was salvation or catastrophe. Cora appeared on the porch, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her belly now prominently rounded at nearly 5 months. She stood very still as Dawson reined in and dismounted, her hands clasped over the child inside her, her face composed into the stillness of a woman who had taught herself long ago to show nothing when everything was at stake. "Letter came through official channels," Dawson said, handing the envelope to Cora. "From a law firm in Boston. Thought you should have it right away." Cora broke the seal. Josiah moved to stand beside her, reading over her shoulder, his heart hammering so hard he was certain Dawson could hear it. The letter was brief, typed on expensive stationery that carried the faint scent of an office far removed from Montana dust and horse sweat. To Mrs. Corinne Mercer, "Your terms are accepted. Mr. Edmund Ashford agrees to cease all legal action regarding your guardianship and marriage in exchange for your formal renunciation of inheritance rights and affirmation that your marriage was entered freely. Enclosed, please find documents requiring your signature before a notary public. Upon receipt of properly executed paperwork, Mr. Ashford will file formal dissolution of guardianship with appropriate courts and consider the matter permanently closed. Mr. Ashford wishes me to convey that while he accepts these terms, he considers your actions a profound betrayal of family trust and duty. He will make no further contact and expects the same courtesy in return. Sincerely, Martin Whitmore, Esquire. Cora read it twice. Then she lowered the letter slowly, and the mask she had been wearing cracked open, and what poured through was 10 years of fear and endurance and caged hope finally breaking free. "He accepted," she whispered. "It is over." Josiah pulled her against him, careful of the belly between them, and held her while she shook. Not crying, not yet, just trembling with the release of tension that had lived in her body so long it had become part of her architecture. When the tears finally came, they were quiet and steady, the kind that wash clean rather than wound. 10 years, she said against his chest. 10 years he controlled me. And now it is done. Sheriff Dawson cleared his throat. "I can notarize those documents right here if you want. No need to ride to town in this weather." They signed the papers on the porch rail, Dawson's breath fogging in the cold as he affixed his seal with meticulous care. Cora wrote her name in firm strokes. Corinne Mercer, not Ashford. Never Ashford again. "For what it is worth," Dawson said as he prepared to leave, "I think you made the right choice. Both of you. You have built something real out here. Do not let anyone make you doubt that." That evening they celebrated quietly. A better supper than usual. Preserved peaches from the root cellar shared by the fire like a luxury. Talk of the future flowing easily for the first time without the shadow of Boston darkening every sentence. Cora fell asleep curled against Josiah's side, one hand resting on her belly, and the expression on her sleeping face was something he had never seen there before. Peace. Not the temporary peace of a reprieve, but the deep settled peace of someone who has finally stopped running. Winter released its grip slowly, grudgingly, the way it always did in Montana. February brought brutal cold, but also the first almost imperceptible lengthening of days. March softened the edges. Snow retreated up the mountains in stages, revealing brown grass that held the memory of green. Cora grew larger. The baby moved constantly now, visible through the fabric of her dress. A restless presence announcing itself with kicks and turns that made Cora gasp and laugh and press Josiah's hand to the spot so he could feel the life they had made together. They prepared for the birth with the thoroughness of people who understood that help was far away and weather was unpredictable. Mrs. Parnell sent detailed instructions and the herbal tea she had promised. Dr. Whitfield confirmed at his last visit that mother and baby were healthy and strong. The cradle stood ready in the bedroom, lined with the softest blankets Cora could find. On a warm evening in late April, nearly 1 year to the day after Cora had stepped off a stagecoach in Benson Creek with a broken face and a carpet bag full of everything she owned, she woke Josiah in the early hours of the morning. "It is time," she said. Mrs. Parnell arrived mid-morning, having been sent for at the first sign of labor. The older woman took charge with the brisk competence of experience, directing Josiah to boil water and prepare linens while she attended to Cora. The labor was long and hard, stretching through the afternoon and into evening. Cora labored with the same fierce determination she brought to everything in her life, gripping Josiah's hand through contractions that seemed designed to split the world apart, breathing through the pain with focused discipline, even as her strength flagged. Near midnight, Rose Mercer came into the world screaming. Josiah held his daughter in shaking hands, this impossibly small creature with dark hair and clenched fists and a voice that filled the cabin with the most extraordinary sound he had ever heard. The sound of a future arriving. "She is perfect," he said through tears he made no effort to hide. "Cora, she is absolutely perfect." He placed the baby in her mother's arms, and Cora looked down at her daughter with an expression that contained everything. Exhaustion and triumph and tenderness and a love so vast and immediate it seemed to have existed before the child herself, waiting in the spaces between heartbeats for its object to arrive. "Hello, little one. Hello, Rose. We have been waiting for you." In the morning, while Cora slept and Mrs. Parnell dozed in the chair by the fire, Josiah stood at the window, holding his daughter against his chest. Dawn was painting the valley in rose and gold, light pouring over the mountains like something being poured from a vessel too full to contain it. Rose was awake, her dark eyes unfocused but solemn, pointed in the direction of his face, as though trying to understand this large, warm thing that held her. "Your mother is the bravest person I have ever known," he told her quietly. She crossed a continent to find a place where she could be free. She stood down men who came to take her back to darkness. She fought with truth when she had no other weapon, and she chose me, which honestly I am still trying to figure out. He kissed her forehead, softer than he had ever touched anything. "You will grow up knowing you are loved, knowing you are wanted, knowing you were born from choice and courage, not obligation or fear. That is our promise to you, Rose Mercer. Whatever else this life brings, you will always know that." Summer came to the valley in full. The snow was gone from everywhere except the highest peaks. The grass grew thick and green, and the surviving cattle fattened on it, and the garden Cora had planted the previous spring erupted with more abundance than the year before, as though the soil itself was celebrating. On a warm evening in June, Cora carried Rose onto the porch and called for Josiah to come look at something. He found her standing at the far corner of the garden near the fence line, her face lit with a wonder that made her look like the girl she must have been before Edmund Ashford stole those years from her. "Look," she said and pointed. The rose bush had bloomed. It was small still, barely 2 feet tall, its stems thin and thorned and stubbornly vertical. But at its crown 3 flowers had opened to the Montana sun, deep red, the color of something that has survived fire. Petals soft as breath, alive and real and impossible, growing from seeds that had traveled in a cloth pouch from Pennsylvania to Boston to a stagecoach headed west, carried by a woman who had nothing left except the faith that some things can take root anywhere if given the chance. "I planted them the first week I was here," Cora said. "My mother gave me the seeds when I was 11. She told me to plant them wherever I ended up. She said they would grow anywhere if I gave them a chance." She looked at Josiah, and in her eyes he saw the full arc of her journey. The girl who lost her parents, the prisoner who endured, the fugitive who ran, the stranger who arrived broken, the woman who healed, the wife who chose, the mother who fought, the gardener who planted seeds in unfamiliar soil and trusted them to grow. She was all of those women, and she was standing in the Montana sun holding their daughter, and behind her the roses bloomed red against the rough wood of the fence. Josiah reached into his pocket and pulled out his father's knife. The blade was worn thin from years of use, but still held its edge, still carried the weight of the man who had carried it before him. He walked to the gate post at the entrance to the property, the post he passed every day going out to work and coming home again, and he carved into the weathered wood with careful strokes. Second Chances. Ranch. Mercer Family. Esther, 1882. He stepped back. Cora moved to stand beside him, Rose cradled against her shoulder, and they looked at the words together. That night, after supper, After the fire was built and the lamps were lit, and Rose was settled sleeping in her cradle with the lavender handkerchief tucked beside her, Cora and Josiah sat on the porch and watched the stars come out over their valley. The air smelled of grass and wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of wild roses blooming at the edge of a garden that had been wilderness a year ago. "Remember when I first arrived?" Cora asked softly. "How broken we both were?" "I remember. Would you have believed this was possible? That we would be here like this, with a daughter and a home and a life we built from nothing?" Josiah thought about that first day, the stagecoach door opening, the bruised woman stepping into the dust, the letter in his pocket that asked him to choose between safety and compassion. Everything that followed had grown from that single moment, from the decision to extend his hand to a stranger and say, "You will be safe here." "No," he admitted, "I would not have believed it, but I am grateful for it." "Me too." She leaned against him, Rose warm and sleeping between them. "This is what happiness feels like, is it not? Not perfect, not without scars, but real and earned and ours. Yeah, this is happiness." The stars turned overhead, ancient and unconcerned with the small, bright lives unfolding beneath them. The valley settled into the sounds of a summer night, crickets and creek water and the soft breath of a sleeping child, the ordinary music of a world that keeps turning, indifferent to human sorrow and human joy alike, holding space for both with equal patience. Inside the cabin, a cradle carved with stars held a baby girl born free. On the fence line, roses bloomed from seeds carried across a continent by a woman who refused to stop believing they would grow. And on the gatepost, freshly carved letters spelled out a name that was both a description and a prayer. Second Chances Ranch, where two people who had every reason to give up chose instead to begin again. Where a man learned that walls built to keep pain out also keep love from getting in. Where a woman discovered that the courage to leave was only the beginning, and the real bravery was in staying, in planting, in trusting the soil. Their story did not end in grand triumph. It ended, or rather continued, in the quiet truth that they had chosen each other and kept choosing every single day through storms and silence and the long, patient work of building something worth protecting. And that, Josiah thought, watching the last light fade from the sky while his wife breathed softly beside him and his daughter dreamed whatever brand new dreams brand new people dream, was more than enough. It was everything.